What if the most feared secrets of the ancient world were not hidden in forbidden texts or lost temples, but carved directly into the bodies and minds of those who dared to enter the cult of Mithras? Imagine standing at the threshold of an underground chamber, the air thick with smoke and iron, knowing that a single mistake during the trials could turn you from a hopeful initiate into a living warning for those who came after. Would you still take the first step into the darkness if you knew that the men who failed were not simply expelled, but transformed into examples of ritual consequence that even experienced followers hesitated to speak about? The world of Mithraic initiation was built on fear, secrecy, and absolute obedience. Every novice who descended into those stone chambers believed the trials would elevate him, granting a connection to forces older than empires. Yet beneath the surface, there was a colder truth. The trials were not designed to reveal inner strength, but to break the ego, test endurance beyond reason, and expose weaknesses in the most humiliating ways. The rituals were crafted to push novices to the edge of physical and mental collapse, while the initiated watched in silence, taking notes from the shadows. Failure was not an abstract idea. It was a sentence, a transformation, a social death that unfolded in front of witnesses sworn never to intervene. Those who entered believed they would find enlightenment. Instead, they discovered a hierarchy, forged through suffering, where every step, every gesture, every reaction was measured. The screams of past novices echoed through the chambers like warnings carved into the walls, reminders that the cult valued devotion over survival. And yet, recruits kept coming, driven by the promise of belonging to one of the most exclusive circles of ancient spirituality. What they did not know was that the most brutal part of the process was not the physical trial itself, but the eerie silence that followed failure, when the initiates stared through their masks as if watching a soul detach from its body. As we begin this journey into the hidden world of Mithraic trials, take a moment to consider how far a secret society could go in the name of spiritual elevation. You ever wondered what truly happened to those who could not endure the weight of these rituals? What you are about to uncover may shift the way you imagine ancient cults and the mechanisms that held their followers in unbreakable loyalty. You already faced situations where the pressure to prove yourself felt overwhelming, where a single mistake could change everything. Stay with me, because the path ahead reveals layers of truth that were never meant to surface. Before we continue, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you believe these ancient trials were about spirituality or control. Make sure to leave your like and check if you are already subscribed to the channel so you do not miss the next revelations. Now, let us move forward, deeper into the darkness these novices once feared. Beneath the shadows of Mithraic temples, the symbols carved into the stone walls were more than decoration. They were a roadmap of judgment, a silent language only the initiated could read. Each emblem, from the serpent coiling around the staff to the bull lying at the center of celestial diagrams, carried a meaning that weighed heavily on the novices. They were taught to memorize every sign, to interpret each in context of the trials that awaited them. Misreading a symbol could cost a man his standing, his pride, and, in some whispered accounts, his very life within the cult. The novices walked carefully, their eyes tracing the faded etchings, aware that every glance was observed, every hesitation noted by the seasoned initiates who patrolled the chambers like shadows, invisible yet omnipresent. The hierarchy within the cult was not spoken of openly, but it was felt with every step. Lower-ranking initiates performed menial tasks, under the watchful eyes of the higher orders, their failures marked not by words, but by subtle gestures, the lowering of a gaze, a deliberate pause in ritual procession. They learned quickly that the trials were not merely physical, they were psychological crucibles designed to expose every insecurity, to challenge obedience, and to break the soul with precision. Each novice carried the weight of expectation like a blade pressed against the chest, and the more they struggled to maintain composure, the more apparent their weaknesses became. It was a test of endurance, intellect, and, above all, fear management. Those who appeared calm often concealed a trembling spirit, and the initiates could detect this tremor, knowing that the failure of one could taint the reputation of the many. The underground sanctuaries were meticulously constructed to amplify anxiety. Narrow corridors, low ceilings, and cold stone floors created an environment where the body's endurance was as much a factor as the mind's. Air thick with incense and faint traces of animal sacrifices disoriented the senses, blurring the line between reality and ritual. Novices were made to crawl, kneel, and endure periods of isolation where sound and light were stripped away, forcing introspection under the weight of expectation. These conditions were not accidents of architecture, but deliberate designs to ensure that each man reached the threshold of fear, where instinct would battle discipline, and only the most resolute would survive the scrutiny of the masters. Every breath felt monitored, every shiver catalogued, and every hesitation became a lesson in subjugation. The cult's power lay not in overt brutality alone, but in creating an environment that made failure both inevitable and instructive. Stories of those who faltered circulated in hushed tones among the novices. Whispers told of men who were forced to confront their deepest anxieties, placed in chambers where illusions of falling or suffocation tested their resolve. Some accounts suggest that these illusions were crafted with meticulous care: weighted ropes, concealed pits, and shifting stone panels engineered to simulate danger, each a rehearsal for the ultimate trial. The novices learned to suppress panic, to breathe against the rising tide of terror, and to project an outward calm even as their internal world collapsed under pressure. Those who mastered the balance between fear and control emerged with a heightened sense of presence, aware that survival depended not just on physical ability, but on psychological acuity. And in this crucible, the symbols on the walls were guides, a code that promised salvation or whispered of doom, depending on how the trials were interpreted and endured. As the novices advanced deeper into the Mithraic chambers, the trials shifted from observation to active confrontation with the rituals themselves. Each step forward brought new challenges, meticulously orchestrated to test the limits of obedience and courage. The first trial required the initiates to perform symbolic acts that mirrored cosmic struggles depicted in the temple reliefs. Every motion, every word spoken, had to match the patterns encoded in ancient scripts, for errors were interpreted as spiritual weakness. The novices' hands trembled as they traced the contours of carvings, and the air seemed to thicken around them, heavy with the expectation of judgment. Silence reigned, broken only by the faint echo of footsteps belonging to the higher initiates, guardians of the sacred knowledge, who noted every misstep with an almost clinical precision. The trials demanded endurance not only of the body, but of perception. In one chamber, novices were confronted with mirrors that distorted their image, reflecting multiple versions of themselves as if to force them to face every potential failure. Those who flinched, who recoiled from their own reflection, were subtly marked by the observers. The symbolism was clear. Only those who could maintain composure when confronted with the fractured self were deemed fit to proceed. The pressure mounted as each room brought more complex rituals, requiring synchronization, memorization, and an unwavering focus under conditions designed to induce stress. Even minor lapses in attention could result in penalties, and those penalties were often not disclosed in words, but in gestures that signaled the initiate's diminished standing, heightening anxiety, and anticipation. One particularly notorious test involved the novices navigating a labyrinthine structure, dimly lit, where tactile and auditory cues guided the way. Sounds of dripping water and distant chants disoriented them, and the walls themselves were lined with hidden obstacles that forced novices to crawl, climb, or contort in uncomfortable positions. Fatigue set in quickly, and mental fortitude became as crucial as physical agility. The initiates who excelled did so not because of strength alone, but because of their ability to interpret subtle cues and anticipate challenges. Failure was immediate and visible. A novice who hesitated or faltered was often made to repeat sections under the watchful eyes of the masters, the repetition itself a psychological torment. Through these exercises, the cult ensured that only those who internalized the rules of obedience and self-control would endure. Whispers among the novices told of punishments that went beyond physical endurance. Those who could not meet the expectations of the trial were sometimes subjected to ritual humiliation in front of peers, forced to witness symbolic consequences meant to instill deep reverence for the hierarchy of the cult. The severity of these punishments was carefully calibrated. They were designed to break arrogance, instill compliance, and reinforce the mystique of the initiated. By the end of this stage, each novice carried the weight of every failure observed, every subtle correction imposed, and every lesson internalized in silence. The experience was exhausting, transformative, and terrifying. An induction into a world where spiritual enlightenment and personal terror were inseparably entwined, forging men who understood that in the cult of Mithras, survival demanded mastery over fear itself. The second phase of the trials revealed the cult's most unsettling methods. Punishments that were as psychological as they were symbolic. Novices who faltered were led into chambers where silence reigned like a living entity, broken only by the occasional echo of a distant chant. These spaces were designed to isolate, to amplify every heartbeat, every breath, every tremor of doubt. The initiates who administered the tests watched carefully, noting reactions, measuring fear, and recording the subtle signs of resistance. Failure here was not about physical inability. It was about the inability to conform to the strict codes of conduct the cult demanded. Even the smallest sign of hesitation could become a mark against the novice, a permanent blemish on his progression toward initiation. One ritual involved a series of symbolic reenactments, each representing cosmic battles between light and darkness, life and death. Novices were forced to enact the roles of both victor and vanquished, a disorienting experience designed to fracture the ego and force introspection. Mistakes were punished not with overt violence, but with ritual humiliation. The failed novice might be made to kneel in silence for hours, eyes fixed on the floor, while the successful initiates performed their tasks with precision. The effect was devastating. A man's sense of self, carefully constructed over years, was methodically dismantled, leaving only the raw nerve of obedience. Stories whispered in the shadows spoke of initiates who emerged from these trials profoundly changed, their will molded, their fear sharpened into a tool for survival. In another chamber, novices encountered tests that challenged their understanding of loyalty and secrecy. They were presented with choices that seemed straightforward, yet each carried hidden consequences. Choosing incorrectly could result in social exile within the cult, the silent observation of peers turning into a form of psychological torment. The fear of judgment, compounded by the elaborate symbolism woven into every ritual, created an environment where every decision was critical. Those who failed often reported sensations of being invisible, as if the walls themselves had eyes and ears, recording every lapse, every misstep. The masters used this pervasive sense of surveillance to teach the novices that perfection in ritual was inseparable from survival in the cult. The culmination of these punishments was a final assessment, an ordeal that combined all previous tests into a single, overwhelming challenge. Novices were placed in situations that demanded immediate action, precise knowledge, and unwavering calm under pressure. Errors were punished with public embarrassment or extended isolation, reinforcing the hierarchy and the omnipresent authority of the initiated. The psychological impact was immense. Men who survived these trials often described feelings of dissociation, as if part of themselves had been left behind in the chamber. Yet, the cult framed these experiences as necessary for enlightenment, teaching the novices that suffering was a gateway to power and understanding. Those who endured carried scars invisible to the uninitiated, marks that bound them forever to the secret world of Mithras. Now, I want to hear from you. Imagine yourself in those chambers. Could you endure the trials, or would fear consume you? Comment below with your thoughts, your theories, or even the emotions that arise as you picture these rituals. Your insight matters, and it helps uncover just how far these ancient initiations pushed the boundaries of human endurance and belief. The novices who survived the initial punishments were ushered into a stage of trials that demanded mastery over both mind and body, a gauntlet designed to distinguish the truly dedicated from those whose will faltered under pressure. In this phase, the initiates were confronted with complex sequences of tasks, each layered with symbolic meaning that linked their actions directly to the cosmology of Mithras. Movements had to be precise, chants recited with exact intonation, and rituals performed in strict accordance with the temple's hidden codes. Any deviation was interpreted as weakness, a failure to align oneself with the forces that the cult claimed to govern the world. The environment was deliberately disorienting. Flickering torchlight, the scent of burning herbs, and the faint echo of distant drums created a sense of perpetual unease, ensuring that even the most disciplined minds were constantly tested. The physical demands were intertwined with mental acuity. Novices were made to traverse narrow tunnels, balance on uneven surfaces, and endure prolonged periods of kneeling or contorted postures, all while reciting complex sequences of prayers and invocations. The trials were not merely tests of endurance, but instruments of transformation, shaping the novice's perception of reality. The higher initiates watched silently, evaluating reactions, cataloging hesitation, and mentally ranking the performance of each participant. This constant surveillance amplified stress, reinforcing the notion that the cult's judgment was omnipresent. The novices understood that success was not a guarantee of safety, but a temporary reprieve contingent upon continued vigilance and obedience. The symbolic elements embedded in the challenges were equally punishing. Novices had to demonstrate comprehension of celestial alignments, the relationships between light and shadow, and the mythical narratives that underpinned the cult's philosophy. Failures in interpretation were met with corrective measures designed to reinforce learning while simultaneously testing humility and resilience. These could include extended periods of reflection in isolation, additional physical exercises, or enforced observation of peers who succeeded where they had failed. The objective was clear: Only those who could internalize the lessons of the trials, maintaining composure and clarity under extreme pressure, could ascend within the hierarchy of the cult. Beyond the structured tasks, the initiates faced unexpected challenges meant to simulate the unpredictability of life itself. Doors that seemed secure would suddenly give way, passages would collapse, and sounds would echo in ways that suggested invisible presences. These orchestrations were carefully engineered to instill adaptability, forcing novices to rely on their wits, instincts, and newly honed skills. Each obstacle was a test not just of physical endurance, but of the ability to maintain focus and presence of mind under duress. Those who adapted and overcame were celebrated, their resilience noted as proof of alignment with the higher truths of Mithras. Through these rigorous trials, the cult ensured that only the most capable, disciplined, and psychologically resilient men could earn the right to advance, while every failure reinforced the gravity and exclusivity of the path they had chosen. The physical extremities of the Mithraic trials were relentless, designed to push novices beyond their perceived limits and into a realm where endurance became inseparable from spiritual insight. Each chamber, corridor, and hidden alcove served as a crucible, demanding strength, balance, and unwavering concentration. Novices were compelled to carry weighted objects symbolizing burdens of life, traverse uneven stone paths that twisted like serpents, and maintain postures that tested joint, muscle, and mental fortitude. Every movement was observed with acute scrutiny. The higher initiates cataloged performance, noting not just completion, but the quality of execution, the steadiness of breath, and the subtle betrayals of fear or doubt. The trials were not merely exercises, they were demonstrations of loyalty, commitment, and the ability to internalize the ethos of the cult, proving that the novice could endure suffering without complaint, hesitation, or distraction. Ritualized endurance extended beyond the body. Novices faced sensory manipulation designed to heighten anxiety and sharpen perception. Torches cast wavering shadows across walls etched with symbolic carvings, creating illusions of motion that unsettled even the most disciplined minds. Sounds echoed unnaturally, whispers and chants amplified by hidden acoustics to create the impression of invisible presences observing every step. Temperature was manipulated, alternating between cold stone and warm incense, forcing the body and mind to adapt to fluctuating conditions while maintaining focus on the symbolic tasks at hand. Novices learned quickly that attention to detail, mental resilience, and physical composure were inseparable, each a requirement for survival in the chambers of Mithras. The masters of initiation devised trials that tested coordination and decision-making under duress. Novices might be presented with sequences of gestures or symbols that required precise timing, repetition, and memory recall while contending with fatigue and stress. Errors were corrected subtly through enforced repetition or extended observation, cultivating humility and reinforcing the hierarchical structure of the cult. Psychological pressure was compounded by the awareness that failure carried consequences visible to the peers and senior initiates. This created a system in which the novice's sense of self was continuously challenged and reconstructed, each trial acting as a forge for both skill and character. Beyond observable performance, the trials demanded mastery of ritualized pain and endurance as spiritual discipline. Novices learned to interpret physical discomfort as a conduit for focus, transforming suffering into a medium through which spiritual insight could be accessed. The combination of extreme physical tasks, mental challenges, and symbolic interpretation cultivated a cadre of initiates capable of navigating complex, high-pressure situations without faltering. Each challenge was carefully engineered to ensure that failure was both instructive and memorable, creating a lasting imprint that reinforced the authority of the cult while shaping the novice into an embodiment of Mithraic principles. Through these extreme rituals, the boundaries of body, mind, and spirit were tested simultaneously, forging men prepared for the ultimate demands of initiation. As the trials of the Mithraic novices reached their most advanced stages, the focus shifted toward judgment, conducted in near-complete silence. The senior initiates, guardians of the temple's deepest secrets, observed the novices with an unyielding gaze, evaluating every decision, every hesitation, every instinctive reaction. Each chamber became a theater of scrutiny, where the novice's body, mind, and spirit were tested simultaneously. They were required to perform complex rituals under precise conditions, with errors silently noted and consequences implied rather than spoken. The pressure was suffocating, as the knowledge that a single misstep could result in permanent disgrace or exclusion weighed heavily on every action. Even the air seemed charged, thick with anticipation, as if the walls themselves were recording the unfolding performance for eternity. The judgment was not merely punitive, it was educational in a brutal, unforgiving manner. Novices were made to confront scenarios that mirrored cosmic and moral dilemmas, often involving choices with no clearly correct answer. The implications of failure were subtle but severe. Lowered status among peers, extended isolation, and the psychological burden of shame that the cult meticulously cultivated. Observation was constant, and the act of watching itself was part of the trial. Senior initiates took notes mentally, memorizing the nuances of every novice's response, every flicker of doubt or hesitation. The novices internalized these observations, knowing that perfection was required not just in performing rituals, but in demonstrating composure, awareness, and adaptability. The psychological weight of being constantly evaluated shaped them as much as the physical and symbolic trials had done. Certain tests introduced elements of deception and uncertainty, designed to challenge perception and reasoning. Novices might be asked to follow complex instructions that shifted unpredictably, or to interpret ambiguous symbols with incomplete guidance. The intent was to cultivate resilience and strategic thinking under pressure, ensuring that the initiates who succeeded were capable of navigating both the known and the hidden elements of Mithraic practice. Failures were addressed without direct explanation. The consequences themselves, silent and profound, reinforced the importance of discipline and attentiveness. This method of judgment fostered a culture of vigilance where novices learned that their choices carried lasting implications for both themselves and the integrity of the cult. At the conclusion of these silent evaluations, some novices were marked for continued progression, while others were designated for further instruction or corrective trials. The experience was transformative. Those who endured emerged with an acute awareness of their own limits, a sharpened ability to endure uncertainty, and a profound understanding of the subtle, invisible rules that governed the Mithraic order. The balance of fear, respect, and reverence instilled by this phase was critical in shaping the character of those who would advance. Now, I want to hear from you. Imagine being watched, judged in silence, every movement weighed against invisible standards. Could you endure this kind of scrutiny? Comment below with your thoughts, reflections, or guesses about how you might have fared in such a trial. Your input helps explore the psychology behind these ancient rituals. Following the silent judgment, the initiates were introduced to trials that tested their understanding of the cult's most guarded mysteries, forcing them to interpret symbolic gestures and ancient mythologies, under conditions designed to strain both memory and intuition. Each novice was required to navigate sequences that mirrored cosmic cycles, enact rituals representing battles between light and darkness, and demonstrate mastery over esoteric knowledge passed down through generations of initiates. The slightest hesitation or misinterpretation could unravel hours of disciplined practice, leaving the novice exposed to subtle forms of reprimand. These challenges demanded a precise blend of intellect, instinct, and learned ritual behavior, reinforcing the notion that the path to enlightenment was inseparable from the ability to endure pressure without faltering. The environments in which these trials took place were engineered to heighten cognitive stress. Flickering torches cast long shadows across the walls, illuminating carvings and reliefs that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. The air was heavy with incense, mingling with the faint metallic tang of stone and moisture, creating a sensory landscape that disoriented the novice while simultaneously sharpening perception. Sound was manipulated deliberately. Distant echoes of chants and low hums played on hidden acoustics, making even the most practiced novices second-guess their movements and timing. The trials were designed not simply to assess knowledge or physical skill, but to cultivate an awareness of perception, adaptability, and mental resilience in circumstances that blurred reality and ritual. Complex, problem-solving exercises formed the core of this phase, requiring novices to synthesize all prior lessons. They were presented with layered tasks that demanded immediate judgment, the correct sequencing of actions, and precise communication with fellow initiates. Each decision carried the weight of consequence, often observed by senior initiates whose silent scrutiny created a climate of perpetual accountability. Novices quickly learned that personal pride had to be set aside. Success depended on humility, attentiveness, and the ability to absorb subtle cues from the environment and peers. The trials fostered a heightened sense of awareness, as novices recognized that every movement, glance, and utterance was part of a broader ritual matrix in which they were both participant and subject. Throughout these exercises, failure was communicated in ways that reinforced discipline and hierarchy without the need for overt punishment. A misplaced gesture or delayed response might be met with a disapproving glance or subtle repositioning within the ritual order, reinforcing the expectation that perfection was not optional. The combination of rigorous intellectual demands, physical endurance, and environmental manipulation forged a cadre of men whose capacity for concentration, obedience, and resilience was extraordinary. By the end of this stage, novices had internalized the complex interplay of symbolism, discipline, and psychological awareness required to survive the upper echelons of Mithraic initiation. Each challenge, meticulously crafted and psychologically calibrated, served to mold not only the skills but the very character of those who aspired to become fully initiated, ensuring that only the most capable could progress further in the hidden hierarchy of the cult. The penultimate stage of the Mithraic initiation subjected novices to a synthesis of everything they had learned, combining endurance, observation, and symbolic comprehension into a single, relentless series of trials. Novices were required to execute complex rituals while navigating treacherous physical environments, recalling detailed sequences of prayers and gestures, and maintaining composure under constant surveillance. Each chamber was designed to test multiple faculties simultaneously, ensuring that no lapse in concentration, memory, or discipline could go unnoticed. Even minor errors carried weight, as every action was evaluated not only for correctness, but for intent, precision, and alignment with the principles of the cult. The novices began to understand that these trials were not merely about ritual mastery, but about shaping their perception, instilling a profound awareness of consequence in every decision. Environmental manipulation played a critical role in this stage. Shadows shifted unpredictably with the movement of torches, while hidden sounds created an auditory landscape that both disoriented and sharpened the senses. Incense and faint scents of minerals heightened the sensory complexity, forcing novices to interpret symbols and execute tasks while contending with physical and cognitive stress. The interplay between environment and ritual demanded that novices remain alert, agile, and mentally flexible. Failure to adapt in even the smallest way could result in subtle but lasting repercussions within the hierarchy of the cult, as senior initiates observed and catalogued performance with meticulous care. The design of these trials ensured that only those who had internalized the principles of endurance, attentiveness, and resilience could advance further. During this stage, novices were frequently presented with ambiguous challenges that required interpretation rather than rote execution. Tasks might include deciphering layered symbols, responding to dynamically shifting sequences, or performing rituals in unpredictable sequences dictated by the timing of light, sound, or environmental cues. These exercises demanded critical thinking under pressure, teaching novices to balance instinct with learned ritual knowledge. The constant observation by senior initiates reinforced accountability, as any deviation was noted and mentally recorded for later assessment. Novices came to realize that the cumulative effect of the trials was as important as any individual task. Mastery required seamless integration of physical capability, intellectual comprehension, and psychological endurance. The penultimate trials served as a crucible for the development of autonomy and judgment within the framework of strict obedience. Novices who endured the mental, physical, and symbolic demands emerged not only with a heightened skill set, but with an internalized understanding of the cult's values, hierarchy, and secret practices. By confronting ambiguity, stress, and constant evaluation, they had internalized lessons that extended beyond ritual into the core of perception, decision-making, and psychological fortitude. The stage prepared them for the ultimate trial, ensuring that those who survived were fully molded into initiates capable of navigating the highest degrees of Mithraic mystery with discipline, insight, and unwavering commitment, poised to inherit the weight of ancient knowledge and the responsibilities of secrecy within the hidden cult.